Hey everyone, Miss Russell here, and I'm back in our next lecture series to talk to you about composition. We're going to be discussing the rules of composition today and tomorrow and learning about how to take your photos to the next level. You ready? Okay, so what is composition? In its simplest form, by its most basic definition, composition is how you arrange the elements in your photograph. Okay? That's a fancy way of saying, where do you put all the stuff in your photos, right? By following these basic rules, and we're going to talk about 7 over the next 2 days. By following these basic rules, you're going to really add to the oomph factor in your images. What I mean by that is, if you were to scroll through your camera roll, right? Go through all the photos on your camera roll in your phone. Most of them would be what I call pictures. And this is the Miss Russell definition, okay? You're not going to find this in any textbook. But most of those would be what I call pictures. They're usually just snapshots, captured moments of time. You didn't think much about the artistic composition, the artistic quality of your photograph. You just snapped the picture because it was something you wanted to take a picture of, okay? But by learning the compositional rules, you are able to now look at images as more than just pictures. You're able to look at them as works of art. I like to say that that's the difference between a picture and a photo, right? The picture is taken unintentionally. It's just capturing a moment of time. A photograph, you are considering all the artistic elements. You're considering the composition, and eventually we'll learn about the elements and principles of design. You're considering all of those, and you are being intentional in how you take your photos. That is the difference between a picture and a photo. And composition will take you to that next level. All right, so let's dive in. The first compositional rule we are going to talk about today is rule of thirds. This is the one that is going to stick in your brain forever, right? It's the one that in 30 years from now, when someone asks you, what do you know about composition? Because of course you're going to have that conversation. When someone asks you, what do you know about composition? Rule of thirds. That's the one that's going to pop into your head and come out your mouth, okay? It's the one that everyone remembers. I don't know why, maybe because it's super easy to understand, maybe because it's easy to apply, but it's going to be the one that sticks in your head. So what is rule of thirds? We're going to look at this little grid to help us understand rule of thirds, okay? Rule of thirds says that we should divide our photograph, and this isn't literal, okay? This is like figuratively. We should divide our photographs into 9 equal sections, right? 2 vertical lines, 2 horizontal lines. You may have seen this grid on your either a cell phone camera, you can turn on this grid, or on a point and shoot camera, just like a little digital camera you hold in your hand. This grid will pop up, and if you've ever wondered what that grid means, it's trying to help you think about your photo in terms of rule of thirds. Okay, so now that we have that grid in our mind, let's go back. So it says that we should divide our photo, and then we should place our subject or our points of interest, the thing that we want to draw our viewer's eye to. We should place our subjects along where those lines intersect, meaning along where those lines cross, okay? So if we go back here, you'll notice that there's a big empty space right in the middle. Too often we are tempted to put our subject smack in the middle of our photograph. But according to the rule of thirds, that creates really uninteresting, really flat photographs, okay? The rule of thirds says that by placing them just a little bit off center along lines, okay? And especially where lines intersect, that creates a more dynamic, a more interesting, what I like to call a more artsy looking image. So let's look at a couple examples of that, right? So this gives you that central focal point, your subject right in the middle, okay? According to the rule of thirds, that's uninteresting. That's throw it out the window, right? Rule of thirds says to shift your subject a little bit. Place them where those lines go, and especially where those lines intersect, okay? Some of you out there might be looking at this image and going, oh yeah, that looks nice. It's pleasing to our eye. Having things a little bit off center, it's pleasing to our eye. Some of us look at that and go, I don't get it. Why is that any better than it being just dead center? Because dead center is boring, all right? By placing it a little bit off center, it gives it just that little bit more of an artsy feel, an artsy oomph, okay? You may disagree with me, but in the world of photography, that's what we say, okay? Placing things off center, make it more visually interesting, make it more dynamic, Okay, it's changing. Again, you're considering where you're arranging the stuff in your photograph, right? So that's why this is a rule, an example of a compositional rule. So that's rule number 1. Let's move on to rule number 2. Rule number 2 is what I like to call the teenager rule, all right? Simplicity. And it seems very simple if you look at it. Simplicity asks you to have, there's that bell again. Simplicity asks you to have one strong focal point in your photograph and get rid of all the clutter. Get rid of all the junk. Remove all the distracting elements. Have one subject and nothing else. Miss Russell, why do you call this the teenager rule? Well, let me tell you. If you were sitting in my class and I was standing in front of you, this would be a lot more interesting, but I'm hoping to use my words in order to illustrate why this is the teenager rule. Okay, so think back to your first day of school, right? First day of school when it's not COVID and when you are all coming onto campus. You have your brand new outfit, right? Ladies and gentlemen, you're making sure your hair looks nice, makeup on, right? We want to look our best on our first day of school. So what do you inevitably do? When you're feeling really nice, you grab your camera and you take a selfie. Okay? It's what teenagers do. You feel nice, you grab your camera, you take a selfie. Now, where is the scene of the crime for the first day of school selfie? I want you to think about it. Where do you always see those selfies? In the bathroom. I don't know why. I don't know why people feel the need to take these selfies in the bathroom, but they do. And all of you are probably nodding your heads at home like, yep, the dreaded bathroom selfie, okay? So while we're thinking like we look amazing, and you look amazing on the first day of school, and we want to record it, and we take that photograph, right, doing our like little face, whatever it is that we do, and you think that everyone is looking at you and how fantastic you look on the first day of school, here's what they're really looking at. They're looking at the background, okay? Scurry music, sorry. They are looking at the background of your photograph, okay? They are noticing the straightener that's still turned on and hanging precariously off the edge of your counter. They're noticing the wet towel flung over the shower curtain, right? This is the perfect example, right? You guys should be focusing on me, and instead you're getting distracted by background noise. It's the same thing in your photographs. You should be focusing on the subject, but instead you're getting distracted by the background. Simplicity asks you to get rid of the background, to fill the frame with your subject, to have no other distracting elements, okay? Simplistic photos can often be termed as boring by a lot of people, but for those of us who enjoy them, it's like, it's a breath of fresh air. Because now, what are my eyes looking at? They're looking at the subject and the subject only. Perfect timing, right? We've lost our distraction, and now we can focus on the subject and the subject only, okay? So simplicity says, get rid of the clutter, focus on the subject. Why I call it the teenager rule. Another part of simplicity asks us to avoid mergers. Mergers are when elements that are in the background of your photo merge with your subject, merge or meld with your subject. Let's look at a couple examples of this. What's wrong with these photos? I've used this photo on the left, Big Ben, right? London. I've used this photo for the last several years as an example of what not to do. Don't tell my brother, because this is a photo of him that he sent me while he was in London, trying to like make me jealous. Look where I am, because he knows that London's my favorite city. And he's like, look where I am. And he sent me this photo, and I'm like, hey, you have a Big Ben growing out of your head. And he's like, thanks, jerk, right? He was very like proud of his photo, and think that we're looking at him and this amazing scenery that he's in, but really all I can see is that Big Ben growing out of the top of his head. That's a merger, okay? Simplicity says, get rid of mergers, get rid of those distracting elements in the background. Right hand side, obviously the merger fountain spouting out of our friend's head there, okay? So simplicity, get rid of the clutter, get rid of the junk, focus on your subject, right? Rule number 3 is line. Let's talk a little bit about line. Line's sole purpose in your photograph is to create movement. your eye, the eye of the viewer, naturally wants to follow that line, okay? Follows it up, down, side, side, around, and around. Line creates movement in our photographs. The most common type of line in a photograph is what we call leading lines, okay? Leading lines do just that. They lead the viewer's eye to a point of interest. Let's look at an example of leading lines, okay? You'll notice the lines on the outside of the frame, right? The lines of the bridge. You'll notice the lines in the foreground, right? That lead you all the way, draws your eye all the way straight to that center of interest in the background, which is the Capitol building, okay? So leading lines should draw your eye to a point of interest, okay? Leading lines of the staircase, leading lines of the pier, leading lines draw your eye to a point of interest, okay? What's the second type of line? Vertical lines. Vertical lines go up and down. Vertical lines are said to create feelings of dominance and power, right? Vertical lines should make you feel small. Horizontal lines, on the other hand, convey a message of stability or of rest, okay? They should be calming. And then curved lines, or an S-shaped line, can give your photo a lot of energy. Again, it creates, oops, why do I have avoid mergers there? That should be on simplicity. Ignore that last bullet point. But curved lines create that feeling of energy, okay? So let's look at some examples of that. First photo, far left of the skyscrapers. That's our example of vertical lines moving up and down. Remember, they create feelings of power and dominance, right? Make you feel small. That's what vertical lines can do. They lead your eye up the photograph, okay? Horizontal lines in the middle create feelings of stability and rest. That horizon line, right? It makes you feel that things are settled, that they're stable, that they're not moving. Curved lines, the S line, are photograph on the far right-hand side of that curved staircase. Your eyes, that creates a lot of energy because your eyes are going around and around and around as it follows that curve down to the bottom, all right? So those are three examples of a vertical line, horizontal line, and curved lines. Rule number 4, framing, okay? Probably one of my favorite compositional rules, framing. Think of it like a frame on a wall. What does a frame on a wall do? Well, it places elements around the outside of your image, okay? Framing in a photograph does the same thing, right? You take elements, things like trees, things like windows, things like archways. You allow them to be placed around the outside of your photograph, and then that helps isolate your subject and then draw the viewer's eye again to a point of interest. That's very often the goal in photography, is to lead the viewer's eye to something. And framing does that by placing these framing elements around the outside, around the edge of your photo, around the edge of your composition. Let's look at a couple. Look at how powerful this is, right? We notice in the first photograph on the left, like a porthole of some kind. I mean, that's probably at an aquarium, a window. We have our subject sitting in the window. So now everything on the outside of that composition kind of fades to nothingness, and our eye is drawn straight to the center of the subject, of the person sitting in that window, sitting in that round frame, okay? Right-hand side, we have the archway. Again, everything on the outside of the composition, on the outside of the photo, kind of fades into nothingness, and where is our eye drawn? It's drawn straight to what is inside of the frame. That archway creates the frame, and our eye is drawn right to the subject. You can use anything to create a frame, anything that isolates a subject. I've had students use like sunglasses. I've had students use like a tube of some kind, like looking through a tube. I've had students use trees, archways, windows, what have you. You can use anything that creates a frame around the outside of your photo and draws the viewer's eye to a point of interest. That is a frame. And look at how powerful it is. Okay, we're gonna stop there for today. That's lecture series part 1. We will pick up with part 2 lecture tomorrow, and I will see you all then.